Okay, so I think now we can start. Okay, so we begin with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. Then the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. And today is October 2nd, 2021. We're now in the autumn time. Wow, the months have gone by just so quickly. Okay, so now we're continuing with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses of the Buddha, Book of Fours. And we are going to start Sutta number 178. Yeah, today we'll be taking some rather technical suttas, a bit on the technical side.
Could you make them a little larger, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see if we make. How is this in terms of size?
Yes, thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so here the text begins by saying that there are 4 kinds of persons found existing in the world. Okay, so what are the 4? Okay, so here we have a monk or just a meditator. Please, everybody, mute your microphones. So a monk or meditator enters and dwells in a certain, what's called a peaceful liberation of mind. Okay, so the Pali expression here is Santang Cheto Vimutting. I want to get my note file. Do you see the note file that I just pasted something in? Does that appear?
Yes, but
Okay, so the expression is anyattarang, which means just a certain one or another. Santang is peaceful. And here we have a cheto vimutti. So this is a liberation of mind, but this is not yet a final liberation, an ultimate liberation, but it is just, we might call this a sort of tentative state of purification, a tentative purification of the mind, a release, a temporary release of the mind from the grip of the defilements. And the commentary explains this as one or another of the 8 samapattis. So what are the 8 samapattis? Here, would be intended would be either the 4 jhanas or the 4 arupa attainments, the 4 formless meditative absorptions. So it says one attainment or another among the 8 meditative attainments. So this is a state of deep samadhi, of deep absorption, concentration. And so it's called a ceto vimutti, a liberation of the mind, because during the duration of this attainment, the mind is not invaded, not overrun, not obsessed by any of the defilements. So the defilements are in a state of suppression. And this kind of suppression, or this kind of freedom from the defilements, is called, technically there's an expression, Vikambana Pahana. That is, it's an abandoning through the suppression of the defilements. And this is compared to, maybe we have a pool of muddy water in which the pool is being struck by the wind. And as the wind strikes the water is in ripples and waves. And then because of the ripples and waves, the dirt and silt and mud are stirred up. And so you have muddy water. But then when the wind stops blowing, then the silt and mud settles down to the bottom, and you have clear water in the pond, apparently clear water. But it doesn't mean that the water is completely free from the mud and silt. The mud and silt is still in the pond, but it's now settled. It's now settled down at the bottom. And if the wind should blow again, then the silt and mud will be stirred up and can again pervade the water. So this kind of peaceful liberation of mind is a state in which the defilements have subsided to the bottom of the mind, but they still remain in the form of the tendencies. You use the technical term anusaya. I think in Chinese this is sui mian. So the underlying tendencies to the defilements, the sleeping or dormant form of the defilements. And so this is not a final satisfactory state of liberation. What one is aiming for through the practice of the Buddha's path is what is called ceto panya vimutti, ceto vimutti. So this is the liberation of mind, which is also a liberation by wisdom. And it's also called the akupa. Ceto vimutti. So akupa means unshakable or imperturbable. So this is the unshakable or imperturbable liberation of mind. The liberation of mind that comes through the eradication of the defilements by means of wisdom. So that kind of removal of the defilements is called samucheda pahana, the elimination through eradication, which is it's the final and total elimination of the defilements, not like Vikambana Pahana is just a temporary liberation of the mind through the temporary abandoning of defilements. Okay, so we'll continue now with the text of the sutta. Okay, so now the monk enters and dwells in a certain peaceful liberation of mind, but now he's he might be aspiring for, that should be the proper aim, is to gain the complete liberation of mind, the final liberation through the eradication of defilements. And that is the aspiration for, the inclination for, the determination upon the attainment of Nibbana. And so now the text continues and says, he attends to, maybe in the sense of aspires to, the cessation of, and here we have a very difficult term in Pali, a very difficult term to render in English. In Pali, it's sakaya nirodha. So let's go back to the note file. So it's the cessation of sakaya. And I've gone through, from the time I started to translate up to the present, I've gone through so many different renderings for sakaya. First, the word sakaya itself, it's a compound of sat, which means existing, plus kaya, which means body, not necessarily in the sense of the physical body, but in the sense of a collection. And then what happens in Pali through principles of phonology, since we never have this combination of consonants, the T gets assimilated to the K. So we have sakaya, literally the existing body, the existing collection. And so I've gone through, following earlier translators, I had rendered this personality, but the word personality in English has completely different meaning from sakaya. Personality means something like your character or the way you present yourself, your state, your dispositions of mind, but that is not sakaya. So then later I changed to identity, but that doesn't quite work. Then I used personal existence, which is a bit cumbersome. And then just when rereading the sutta in preparation for the class, then I changed it to the assemblage, or maybe we could say the personal assemblage. And so what exactly is intended by sakaya? So let's continue with my notes. And so here we have a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. It's chapter 22, Sutta 105. So the Buddha says, what is sakaya? And then he says the answer should be, it's the collection of the 5 panchupadana khandha, the 5 aggregates of clinging. So bodily form, feeling, perception, the volitional activities, and consciousness. So those 5 together, coming together as a integrated collection, that is what is meant by sakaya. And we know from the first noble truth, the Buddha says what is meant by dukkha, or the dukkhaṃ arya saccang, the noble truth of dukkha. And after he goes through the more obvious forms of suffering, then finally he wraps it up by saying, in brief, the 5 clinging aggregates are dukkha. And so we have a kind of equation of dukkha with the 5 clinging aggregates, and the 5 aggregates equated with sakaya. And so the aim of the Buddha's path is dukkha nirodha, the cessation of dukkha. And since as long as the 5 clinging aggregates remain, then there is dukkha, maybe not in the form of felt suffering, but some degree of unsatisfactory experience. And so one is aiming for the cessation of dukkha, which means the cessation of the 5 clinging aggregates. And so here we have the practitioner who's able to enter into the higher meditative absorption or samadhi, then turns the mind to the cessation of the assemblage of the 5 aggregates. But as he's doing so, the text continues, his mind does not launch out towards it, acquire confidence, become steady, and resolve upon it. Let me go back to the sutta. Yeah, so we have a series of terms here. So first, as he is attending to or directing his mind to the cessation of sakaya, the 5 clinging aggregates, then his mind does not pakandati. The sense of pakandati is to enter upon, sort of to plunge into. And then pasidati is to become pleased with, to settle down upon. Or here we have to acquire confidence. I'm not so sure that that really works so well, but pasidati, it's actually based on the verb sidati, which means to sit down. And then from there we get to settle down upon. So it doesn't settle down upon the cessation of this assemblage. And then santitati has the idea of becoming, of standing upon, literally standing upon, or becoming stable in it, persisting with it. Here we rendered to become steady in it. And then lastly, we have na adimuchati. Yeah, the verb adimuchati, it's a prefix with muchati, and muchati is to become free. And it's from this root muchati that we also get the word vimutti, which is a prefix form of muti. Muti is freedom, and muchati is to become free. But adimuchati has a different nuance. It is to release the mind upon. The prefix adi has upon, so one is not released upon it, and that one is not sort of surrendering to it, giving oneself completely over to it. But we could say that there's a little bit of hanging back, a little bit of sticking fast, a little bit of maybe in the mind there's a little bit of a reservation about it, so that one doesn't launch out upon it. So then the text continues. So this monk cannot be expected to attain the cessation of sakaya, this assemblage. And we could say that what is taking place, this would be my understanding. Okay, so one first enters and dwells in this state of meditative samadhi, this peaceful liberation of mind, then in order to attain the cessation of sakaya, one emerges from that state of absorption, but the afterglow of that state of samadhi still continues. And so in the afterglow, with the residual force of calmness and concentration, one turns to the practice of insight, developing vipassana through contemplating the five aggregates by way of the three characteristics as impermanent, dukkha, unsatisfactory, anatta, non-self. And so one is moving in the direction of attaining the paths and the fruits. But when one reaches the point of actually making the jump from the stage of insight to path attainment, there's still that subtle clinging remaining. And because of that subtle clinging, that subtle attachment, one is not able to make the jump. So we have a simile to illustrate this. It's a very nice simile. So we have a man, and the way the commentary elaborates upon this, it says that the man wants to get from one bank of the river to the other bank of the river. And this bank of the river represents samsara, the round of birth and death, which is said to be dangerous, fearful, insecure, and so on. And the far shore or far bank of the river is Nibbana, the state of supreme security, supreme safety. And the way one would get across is by leaping from tree to tree. One climbs up to a tree and hangs on to the branch of a tree, and then one would jump from tree to tree using the branches to hang on, just like a monkey. If you've ever seen a monkey move through the forest, it jumps from tree to tree by first holding onto one branch, then it lets go of that branch and jumps over to the nearby tree, and then grabs onto the nearest branch of the next tree. And then it swings through the second tree till it comes to the furthermost branch, holds on to that, then lets go of that and jumps onto the branch of the next nearest tree, or to the nearest branch of the next tree. Yeah, many times when I was living in Sri Lanka, I would just observe the monkeys traveling across the forest, and they're very graceful, very skillful. But actually, it's not that they actually hold on to the old branch and then grasp onto the new branch, but they actually jump across. They let go of the old branch and jump across and then grab the next branch. And then they move through the second tree till they get to the furthest branch of that tree. Then when they see another nearby tree, they let go of the branch of the second tree, and then they're flying through the air a little way, a few yards. Then they grasp onto the branch of the third tree. And so here we have the man maybe traveling like the monkey, traveling through the trees with the intention of jumping across to the far shore, to jump across the river and grab onto a branch of a tree hanging over the river on the other bank. Then he could descend from that tree and then get onto the safe side of the river. The tree on the other branch, on the other side of a river, that would be maybe the path and fruition attainments. And then one descends from that onto Nibbana. Okay, but here we have a man who has his hand is smeared with some kind of gum, some kind of glue. And so he grabs hold of a branch and he's trying to jump onto the next tree, but his hand sticks to the branch, it's fastened to it, and he can't get free from that tree onto the next tree, let alone can he be expected to jump across the river. And so this is like the meditator who enters into this peaceful liberation of mind, but has this a subtle kind of clinging, and so is not able to attain the cessation of sakaya. In other words, to attain Nibbana. So that is the first practitioner. Then the second practitioner is just the opposite of that. And so this is the meditator who enters a peaceful liberation. Then he undertakes the practice of insight with the aim of reaching the cessation of sakaya. But as he is doing so, then his mind, in this case, we get rid of the negations. His mind launches out to it, settles down upon it, becomes stabilized upon it, and is released upon it, no longer holding back, but in a sense surrenders to it, releases itself into that cessation of the assemblage. And in that way, we could expect this person to attain the cessation of the assemblage. In other words, to attain Nibbana. And so this is like a man who grabs hold of the branch now with a clean hand, not a hand smeared with gum. And so in this case, his hand doesn't stick to the branch, and he can leap from branch to branch, following the simile of the commentaries, from branch to branch. In this case, he might be going through one meditative attainment after another. Then he develops the insight meditation, and then he comes to the last tree on the near bank of the river. Then he makes the leap across. He's able to let go of the last tree on the near bank of the river, and he grasped hold of the branch of the tree on the far shore. That would be the attainment of the path and fruit. And so he goes through the stages of eventually stream entry, once returning, non-returning, arhatship, till he attains Nibbana, the cessation of the assemblage. So that is the first. Here we have a contrast of two pairs, a contrast of two people, one pair, in order to illustrate the practitioner who fails in the practice and the one who succeeds. Then we have what is roughly the same contrast, but looked at from a different perspective. Here we have, instead of the cessation of sakaya, the sort of key phrase is the breaking up of ignorance. So avijja is ignorance, not knowing the Four Noble Truths, not knowing the three characteristics, not knowing the dependent origination. And so now we're attending to the breaking up of ignorance, the complete breaking up of ignorance. And so in the case of the first practitioner, as he's doing so, his mind doesn't launch out towards it, doesn't settle down upon it, doesn't become stabilized in the task of breaking up ignorance, and doesn't resolve upon it, or doesn't surrender to it, doesn't release itself upon the breaking up of ignorance. And so this practitioner can't be expected to attain the breaking up of ignorance. Okay, then we have a simile here, which is a bit unfamiliar to me, because apparently the simile is formulated or framed against a background, the ancient Indian background of the way things are done in the villages. And so in this case, even though I rendered this as a reservoir, but it seems from this elaboration in the commentary, this is not the reservoir where one stores water for drinking. That would be a good kind of reservoir. But the way the commentary explains it, this is like a place where wastewater accumulates, water with a lot of garbage in it. Because in that case, you want to break the embankment. The breaking of the embankment is a good thing. So we have this kind of, maybe it's almost like a cesspit. So if a man would close off its inlets, and open its outlets, and sufficient rain would not fall, in that case, it could not be expected that the embankment of this reservoir would break. Oh, I see. The sense is that one wants to get rid of all of the accumulated garbage in this kind of dump. And so if you open up the outlets, the water would come out, but the rain would not fall. And so all of the accumulated garbage would remain in that dump. And that would be undesirable. So in this case, the reservoir's embankment wouldn't break. So that's like the monk who doesn't attend to the breaking up of ignorance. Okay, and then the contrasting case, we have the monk enters and dwells in the peaceful liberation of mind, attends to the breaking up of ignorance, directs his mind to breaking up of ignorance. So this meditator will go on developing the insight knowledges and go through the entire series or scale of insight knowledges till he reaches the highest stage of insight knowledge. Then he'll persist in that and maybe go on sharpening the insight knowledge until one breaks down the first barrier of ignorance and reaches the stage of stream enterer, then continuing to break down the second stage, one reaches the stage of once returner, the third obstacle, one reaches the stage of non-returner, then the fourth barrier of ignorance, one breaks it down, and one reaches the stage of arhatship, the path and fruit of arhatship. And so it seems to me that like this third person, maybe if we use the explanatory scheme of the Visuddhimagga, this could be a person who goes through the stages of insight and knowledge, sort of based on the particular level of samadhi he attains. He goes through the insight knowledges till he reaches the final stage of insight knowledge before the path process, which is called Sankarupeka Jnana, the knowledge of equanimity about formations. In that stage is said to be very peaceful and tranquil because it's characterized by equanimity. So one is observing and watching sankharas arise and pass away, but one is watching from this perspective or platform or standpoint of tranquil equanimity. And there can be, because that equanimity is so subtle, there can be a subtle attachment to that equanimity. And because of that subtle attachment to the equanimity, one doesn't deepen the insight knowledge to the point that one obliterates the barrier of ignorance. And so what I've heard from about one meditation teacher in Sri Lanka, what he advised meditators who reach the equanimity of the equanimity about formations, remember he advised them to go back in the stages of insight knowledge, coming back to the stage of Bhanganyana, the knowledge of dissolution, where one is sharpening the insight into the breaking up and perishing of formations. And when you do that, that again heightens the perception of danger and of fearfulness of conditioned formations. And so through that advice, then the meditator will come back to the stage of Bhanganyana, the knowledge of dissolution, and that heightens the perception of fearfulness, the perception of danger. And then the meditator will propel through the higher insight knowledges, then just slide through the equanimity of formations without sticking to it until the meditator reaches the path and fruition. Okay, so let's then continue with the fourth person. So this one enters that peaceful liberation, attends to the breaking up of ignorance, and now the mind launches out towards it and becomes settled upon it, steady upon it. And this was an old rendering that still didn't get corrected. And resolves upon it. Okay, maybe it's, so this might be compared to the practitioner. How do I get rid of this thing? Okay. So this might be compared to the meditator who doesn't sort of get detained, doesn't get sucked in to the equanimity about formations, but passes through that stage. It then goes on, enters what is called the stage of conformity, this anuloma jnana, this change of lineage, gotrabhu jnana, and then reaches the path and fruition attainments until going through the four levels, finally he reaches the final breaking up of ignorance and the attainment of arhatship. And so this is compared to that reservoir many years old. You see, it's not a good reservoir, but it's accumulated a lot of dirt, like a lot of waste that you want to get rid of. And so here the man opens up the inlet so that the water flows out. Wait, opens up the inlets, but closes off the outlets so that the water won't flow out. And then a lot of rain falls. And in that case, the reservoir or the rubbish heaps embankment breaks, and then all of the rubbish will flow out. It's a little bit of a strange simile, at least for me, since I don't have familiarity with this kind of situation. And so here we have the monk enters and dwells in the peaceful liberation, attends to the breaking up of ignorance, and then attains the breaking up of ignorance. So those are the 4 kinds of persons found existing in the world. Okay, so that takes care of sutta number 178. Maybe we could see if any questions. And if you want to ask questions, you know how to use the hand symbol. And I think, Olivia, your hand is up there.
Yes, good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
I had a question I started reading back this morning, and when you defined volition early on, I think it was 4:170, there's a reference to the fact that we all get caught up in doing different things based on having a body, speech, and mind, and that the underlying all of this is ignorance. And I think in one of your footnotes, I grasped the fact that an ignorance is usually compromised when we do something either wholesome or unwholesome. So can I use that example in regards to what you talked about today when you referred to the reservoir being one that is full of waste material? And if we were to shift between wholesome and unwholesome things, clear it out, that's one way of getting into another phase of mind, another level of purity of mind, in order to, look to move forward with insight. And I just wondered if that would be a good basis, basically, for practicing. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure that I got exactly the point of the question. You said something about whenever one does something, let's see, wholesome or unwholesome, ignorance is compromise.
Yes, if we go back to that little sutta on volition, I think it's your footnote 866 that says typically ignorance is compromised, and that's because of 2 functions: coexistence and decisive support. And I'm seeing that as a way in which ignorance is compromised because we either coexist with it in a wrong way, or we make decisions to step away from it in a good way. And that's where the wholesome and unwholesome comes in. I'm not sure if I'm right. I'm just speculating.
Okay, let's see what. Okay, it's 171. And what was the footnote?
866.
866.
Yes,
Of course, I see. It must be 240s. Wait,
I'm going to go back to it
because
again.
the footnotes are 2.
I'm sorry, the footnote says the ignorance is comprised, not compromised.
Comprised, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
I take back everything, Mati. I should read slowly.
Yeah. Ignorance is comprised in those states. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, even with the ordinary mundane wholesome activities, there's some ignorance is underlying that. But in order to move to remove ignorance, you have to start off by abstaining from the unwholesome and cultivating the wholesome.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Okay. Ian.
Morning, Bhante.
Yeah.
Just your clarification or expansion on this. Out toward it, acquire confidence, become steady, and resolve upon it.
Yeah.
Do you mind could just explain a little bit more? Is it basically the mind getting more confident?
I think
more faith.
I don't really. like this rendering so much, even though I used it. Maybe I picked this up from Venerable Nyanamoli. Okay, launching out upon this means that you're sort of strongly intent upon it, that you're directing the mind towards that. So that's what's pakandati, launching out upon. Then the next one is pasidati. So as I said, it comes from the verb sidati, which means to sit down. And with the prefix pa, it gives the sense of becoming somewhat calm or maybe settled upon. Like when a pond of water in which there's a lot of waves and ripples, when the wind stops blowing and that surface of the water becomes calm, we could say that is the water becomes pasidati, it settles down. So the mind is now settling upon this goal. And then becoming steady is that one is persisting in it. And then resolved, it's translated here, resolved upon it. As I said, you're releasing yourself towards it. You're not holding back anymore. That's about the clearest that I can make those terms. Okay. Chiliang, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, but I was just thinking about the reservoir. I think I have no knowledge of the ancient system, but my guess is that the inlet is higher up in the hill, so that when it's opened up and then when the rains accumulate, the pressure would build and then the outlet would break.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't want to dwell so much on the simile because it's something that I don't have
I was just
personal
thinking about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, is that Xiaoping?
Yes. Yeah, Bande, we have two students here. We have question about the last two cases. And the last two cases, how can we associate with them with the practice, especially the similes? We are not quite sure we understand this.
So what difference they do, the practitioner, what difference they make, and one just can break through, one doesn't. We didn't catch that.
What is it that distinguishes the one who breaks through ignorance from one who doesn't?
Yes. What difference they do?
Yeah. It has to do with with the intention of the mind. As you can see here, the mind has to launch out upon it and then become settled upon it, become steady and resolve upon it. So actually, I would say that the simile about the branches, about moving from branch to branch, can also apply to this one, to this case. To me, it's more meaningful immediately than the simile of the breaking the reservoir, the embankment of the reservoir. So if the person has the hand smeared with glue, they're not going to be able to let go of one branch and jump onto the next branch. And so if there's some kind of hanging back in the mind, that could be like an attachment to the higher stages of insight knowledges, but one becomes attached to those insight knowledges, and then one doesn't launch on to the next transcendent stage of knowledge, the wisdom of the path, then one doesn't break up ignorance. That's the only explanation I can give.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Bande.
But I want to move on now to the next sutta, because I wanted to cover two today. So I see there are still some hands, but we have to move on. Okay, so whoops. Okay, so this is now we come to sutta number 179. So jump to a very different topic. This is, the title is given as Nibbana. So this is a dialogue. Venerable Ananda comes to Sariputta and says, why is it that some beings don't attain final Nibbana or final liberation in this very life? And then the answer is very concise. So he says, friends, some beings do not understand as it really is. These perceptions pertain to deterioration, or we could say decline. These perceptions attain to stabilization, to remaining steady. These perceptions pertain to distinction, and these perceptions pertain to penetration. So that's why some don't attain final Nibbana. And then why do some attain final Nibbana in this very life? How is it that some attain final Nibbana in this very life? Then the answer is just the converse. Okay, so there are beings or people who understand as it really is. These perceptions pertain to deterioration or decline, sort of backsliding. These perceptions pertain to stabilization, to remaining steady. But this could also maybe be interpreted as when you remain steady, it's good. You don't want to decline. But if you just remain steady without going further, then the stability can turn into stagnation. You just sort of hang in there, but don't advance further. So therefore, you have to move on to the next stage. These perceptions pertain to distinction, that is excellence, or to going to the next higher stage. And then these perceptions pertain to penetration. So that is how some beings here attain final Nibbana in this very life. And I'm going to take the Pali text and paste it in so we could see. Please, people, everybody should be muting their microphone because we're getting some noise. Okay. Okay, so the key phrases here are Hanabhagya Sanya. And the use of Sanya, I have to say, is a little bit strange here. It seems to be more than just perceptions, but ideas, mental processes, and so on, which are on the side of Hana is decline, deterioration. Then we have Titi Bhagya Sanya. So Titi is based in Sanskrit stiti, which is related to the English word stable. So stability, or related to the English word steady, remaining steady, gaining steadiness. And then Visesa Bhagya Sanya. So these are the ideas or mental processes which lead to going beyond, to going higher, to excellence, to distinction, to the next higher stage. And then we have the ideas or mental processes leading to Nibbana, which is translated as penetration. And the word Nibbana, well, I'll come to Nibbana. But first, let's see some other suttas in which we find these expressions. And what's interesting, I did a search, global search through the Pali Canon, and we don't find these expressions used very often. But I found one sutta, again in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Sixes, number 71, in which speaks about how a monk is capable of realizing a particular state when there is a suitable basis. And we find this expression used in relation to gaining the 6 abhinyas, the 6 direct knowledges, that is the psychic powers, the divine ear, the ability to hear sounds, distant sounds or sounds in other realms of existence, the ability to read the minds of others, the recollection of past lives, the divine eye by which one could see other realms of existence, and the knowledge of the destruction of the asavas, of the defilements. So the basis for those 6 abhinyas, those 6 direct knowledges, is the attainment, the mastery of the 4 jhanas. And then the mastery to get the 6th abhinya, the 6th direct knowledge, the destruction of the asavas, of the defilements, one has to master panya, or wisdom. And so the sutta says, so what are the 6? Again, one understands that really is the qualities. Here it doesn't use sanya, but dhamma, qualities or states that lead to deterioration, that lead to stabilization, that lead to distinction or excellence, and that lead to penetration. So those are the first 4. Then the other 2, one practices carefully and one does what is suitable. Now the Abhidhamma text, canonical Abhidhamma text, has a passage, the text called the Vibhanga has a section which speaks about, it uses the word panya, the wisdom relating to deterioration, the wisdom relating to stabilization, and the wisdom relating to excellence, pertaining to excellence or distinction, and the wisdom pertaining to penetration. And so it explains these first in relation to the first jhana. And so if somebody attains the first jhana, but then it says perceptions and mental activities, sanya manasikara, connected with sensual desire, start to seep into the mind and to penetrate the mind. Somehow it says that this is the wisdom pertaining to deterioration. But I think what is meant is that when one recognizes and realizes that after attaining the first jhana, one realizes that now these ideas and mental activities connected with sensuality are starting to attack the mind, then one recognizes this. So this is the wisdom pertaining to deterioration. So with that wisdom, one doesn't allow the mind to get overrun by sensual desire and so forth, but one is able to undertake activities to apply the appropriate antidote to suppress that sensuality. Then comes the wisdom pertaining to stabilization. So this is defined simply as the mindfulness in accordance with that becomes stabilized. I guess this would be the mindfulness that is in accordance with the first jhana becomes stabilized. It's a little bit puzzling explanation, but this is said to be the wisdom pertaining to steadiness or stabilization. Okay, then what is the wisdom pertaining to, relating to distinction or excellence? So this is when ideas and mental activity associated with the absence of discursive thinking, arise in the mind. So this is the kind of wisdom that understands what is necessary to advance from the first jhana to the second jhana, because the second jhana is the state in which vitakka and vichara, the applied thought and sustained thought, or thinking and examination, have been abandoned. So when one starts to reflect on the need to remove discursive thinking by strengthening concentration, this is the wisdom pertaining to excellence, to distinction. And then what is the wisdom pertaining to penetration? Okay, now the word, now I could explain the word penetration. So it's based on the prefix near plus the noun vade, which is actually, let's take the verb vadati. The verb vadati is like to shoot an arrow at it so that it hits the target. And near gives a sense of going out, or maybe through here. So we have what happens when an R and a V meet in Pali. We have nirveda. So nirveda would be penetration, piercing through. But when R and V meet, then it turns into a double B, just like with nirvana in Sanskrit becomes nibbana in Pali. So this is the wisdom pertaining to penetration. And this is explained here as sanya manasikara, so ideas and mental activities associated with disenchantment and connected with viraga, with dispassion. And what are these ideas and mental activities? For this, we have to turn to another sutta. Yeah, this is in the Digha Nikaya, Sutta number 33, which I could only copy the Pali. So this says that there are 6 perceptions that pertain to penetration. So this would be insight knowledge, that of a strong insight knowledge, when the insight knowledge strong enough to bring the breakthrough to the attainment of the paths and fruits and Nibbana. So this would be the idea or the perception of impermanence, then the perception of what is impermanent as being dukkha, inherently defective or unsatisfactory, then the perception of what is dukkha, unsatisfactory, as being non-self. So those are the 3 basic insight knowledges: the perception of impermanence, perception of the unsatisfactory nature of things, perception of non-self. Then 3 additional perceptions are mentioned: the perception of abandoning, and I guess this could be taken to be the abandoning of wrong conceptions, the conception of permanence, the perception of pleasure, the perception of self. And then comes the perception of dispassion and the perception of cessation. And these would be the higher stages of insight knowledge, where one is perceiving, actually viraga, I think here has more the sense, not of dispassion, but of the disappearance or fading away. So these are higher dimensions of the insight into impermanence. When the insight into impermanence becomes extremely powerful, then one sees conditioned phenomena as dissolving and vanishing. That's viraga. And then one has the perception of them as seizing, that they've seized. Each phenomena that arises has seized. So those are the 6 perceptions that pertain to penetration. And then it will be these, coming back to the original sutta, I'm going to have to wrap this up. Okay, so it seems to me that the first 3 perceptions initially apply to the different stages of samadhi, to the attainment of the successive jhanas or the formless meditations, but also you could see them also pertaining to, almost you could apply these to any aspect of one's life. One could see where one maybe is sliding into maybe moral transgressions or loose observance of the precepts that would be leading to deterioration, where one is stabilizing one's observance of the precepts. That's the second stage, where one is going beyond simply the precepts to go on to trying to develop samadhi. That would be ideas pertaining to distinction. And then developing insight knowledges would be ideas pertaining to penetration. And then with the successive stages of insight knowledge, if one is going backsliding to a lower stage, that would be deterioration. If one is stabilizing the insights that one has achieved, that's perception pertaining to stabilization. Then going through to the next higher stages of insight knowledge, that's pertaining to distinction. And then when those insight knowledges reach the stage of truly penetrating the nature of things, then it's perceptions pertaining to penetration. So it seems to me that they have a kind of broad application. Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go up for the meal, and I wanted to finish the sutta today. I just wanted to bring one sutta in, though, that illustrates the application of these, at least the first 3 kinds of perceptions, to the ascent to the scale of samadhi. I'll just refer to it. You can look it up for yourself. Yeah, it's a discourse which the Buddha gave, or a series of discourses. Oh, I didn't paste it in there. Which the Buddha gave to his disciple Moggallana. When Moggallana was still not yet an arhat, still practicing, he had gone off to practice meditation. And each time, first the idea comes to him. Let me increase the size. Can you see that particular file from about Moggallana?
Yes, Bhante.
Okay, the size is okay. We could make it a few. Okay, here Moggallana is practicing. Then when he was alone in seclusion, the idea arose in his mind, the first jhana. So he thinks of the first jhana. So you could say that this is an idea pertaining to excellence. So now he's aspiring for the first jhana. And so he realizes what the first jhana attains. Then he attains the first jhana. He says, I entered and dwelt in the first jhana. But then when I was dwelling there, then perception and attention, or ideas and mental activities accompanied by sensuality, assailed me. So these would be ideas connected with deterioration. So they're starting to attack Moggallana. But then the Buddha comes to Moggallana and says, do not be negligent regarding the first jhana. Steady your mind in the first jhana. Unify your mind in the first jhana. Concentrate in the first jhana. Okay, and then Moggallana does so. So we could say that that would be the stage of ideas pertaining to stabilization. So he says, I then entered and dwelt in the first jhana. So that would be ideas pertaining to stabilization. But then later, after he stabilizes the first jhana, then the idea comes into his mind, the second jhana. So this would be an idea pertaining to distinction or excellence, to moving on to the next stage. And then he attains the second jhana. And then while he's while he's in the second jhana, maybe trying to he's not yet stabilized it, but he's entered it. But then perceptions accompanied by vitakka and vichara, by thought and examination, start to attack him. So then he maybe falls away from the second jhana to the first jhana. Then the Buddha comes to him and encourages him to stabilize his mind in the second jhana. And then he does so. So these would be ideas of stabilization, of steadiness. So now he stabilizes the mind in the second jhana. And then later, then he starts thinking of the third jhana and aspiring for the third jhana. So those would be ideas connected with distinction or excellence, moving on to the next stage. And in this way, the whole process goes through each of the jhanas, the formless meditations, up to the signless concentration of mind, till Moggallana becomes stabilized in the signless meditative absorption. And then after that, on that basis, he attains arhatship. Okay, we're going to have to end the discussion here because I'll have to go up for the meal. And before we end, I just want to remind people that my organization, Buddhist Global Relief, this afternoon on California time from 1 to 3 p.m., on East Coast time from 4 to 6 p.m., we'll be having our national event, first national event, called Buddhist Action to Feed the Hungry. It's the first part of our major first fundraising activity of the year to replace our usual walks to feed the hungry. So you could join us either this afternoon, again from 1 to 3 Pacific time, and then we'll be having the second major fundraising event, October 30th, that will be based on the East Coast states. And then that will be from 1 to 3 p.m. on East Coast time. So please make an effort to join at least one of these two events, where we'll give overviews of our Buddhist Global Relief projects around the world, as well as Dharma talks by noted Dharma teachers. Okay, so let me do a quick sharing of the merits, and then we'll have to end for the day and continue next week. Okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the nagas or dragon spirits, the fear spirits, and so on. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. dukkha pata janu ni dukkha baya pata jani baya soka pata jani soka hantu sabepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And we all go sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu,
Thank you,
sadhu.
Bante.
Thank you,
Thank
Bante.
you, Bante.
Okay, so thank
Thank
you.
you, Bante. Enjoy the
Thank you,
dance.
Bante.
Keep well, Bante.
Okay, okay,
Okay, Dana.
Thank you, Bante.
okay,
Bante.
bye-bye.
Everyone.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.